Hello, everyone. I am back with chapter 26 of System Synthesis titled I Need Some Help. Isuka wasn't stupid. He knew what others who didn't know Katsuki's special way of apologizing would think. He also knew that the only reason he wasn't being hounded by them for answers was because of his dad. Honestly, bless him. He's a god amongst men. Although, from the way he had seen Ashiro, Kaminari, and Uraka shift around in their seats every time his eyes would aimlessly wander around the class, he was worried that maybe even his dad's presence won't stop them. So as soon as Shota was done giving them a brief summary of their upcoming schedule for the week, along with the changes made to their timetable to accommodate for the sports event, Suku was highly tempted to follow after him about a question he didn't have. The bell rang, and his dad walked out of the room. Itsuki scrunched his nose and pouted when he saw his dad drag his eyes around the room and gave a subtle, amused grin towards him that only he would be able to see. Good luck, his eyes seemed to say. Itsuki fought the urge to pettily make a face at him. He walked out and the door closed behind him. For the first time, the class was actually in pin drop silence. That was until it wasn't. With the speed that Uraka, Ashiro, and Kaminari moved out of their seats, Itsuki was tempted to believe they had a mitre speed based quick. Midoriya, Uraka chirped the same time Ashiro and Kaminari hounded his best friend. Midoriya, if you don't mind, can I ask you a question? Uraka said, lowering her voice at the end, like Isuku didn't already know what she was going to ask. Like the entire class wasn't expecting the question, and was the only reason they were so quiet. So that even if Isuku kept his voice low, at least the ones around him would be able to hear him in the silence. Nosy bastards, the whole lot of them. But unlike Uraka, Ashiro had no qualms and spoke very loud and excitedly. Lucky bro, you didn't tell us you were dating Middle Bro? Katsuki, the ever emotionally stunted idiot, scrunched his face up in a frown and asked in return, Huh? Why would I tell you? Isuku didn't know if he wanted to facepalm himself or his friend hard enough to leave some mark. Kachan, Isuku started, trying to get his friend to understand how wrongly his reply could be interpreted. But before he could, Uraka cut in, and from the way she was practically bouncing on her toes, her cheeks flushed a soft shade of pink. It seems she had lost whatever little hesitation she had earlier. So you are dating him? Uraka asked sweetly. Whether curious or not, she was still a very sweet and bubbly person. Itsuku sighed fondly in his mind, because seeing Uraka smile like that was like standing under the warm sun rays on a cold winter morning. It was a nice feeling. But because no one ever claimed Isuku to be not a petty person, he twisted his lips into a disgusted frown and answered, ill. The reaction came faster than he was expecting. A hand slammed on the desk behind him, and the sound of a chair being scraped against the floor filled the room. Huh? Did you just ill, you little shit? Katsuki exploded. What, I'm not good enough for you? Huh? You think you're too good to date me, is that it, Isuku? You wanna fight? Isuku looked at Katsuki with a comically judgmental look. Around him, he heard both Uraka and Hitoshi snicker seeing his expression. Then he looked at the others like he was staring into a camera, with an expression that said, You see this? You see what I have to deal with every day? The sweet smell of nitroglycerin invaded his nose. Long ago, it was a scent that terrorized him, made him flinch and tremble in fear. In another life, it still did. But in this life, the scent of nitroglycerin was something Isuku had grown to find comfort in. Explosions like a series of Firecrackers popped beside him. Katsuki growled. Come to the pit, I'll take care of you there. Itsuki, because he was a little shit, and currently the people who could handle him were missing, put on a scandalized expression. Gotchan! He pretended to look around to check if they would notice, even though everyone was already staring at him. You can't say things like that in public. He was sure he heard Shinso and someone else, perhaps Jiro, Noit in the background. Katsuki froze like he was a mannequin. Then his left eye twitched. Alright, that's it, he said. Give me back my gift. Bastards like you don't get apologies. Come on! Itsuki whined playfully, dodging the attack headed towards him with ease. Come on, don't be mad at me because I said no now. I promise I'll. Katsuki's hand, still hot from the explosions before, slammed over his mouth. His cheeks were red out of rage or embarrassment. Itsuki didn't know. I'm confused. Kaminari Smoke broke up with an adorably confused expression on his face, and he looked between Katsuki and Itsuki. Are you two dating or not? Itsuki pushed off Katsuki's hand and answered, Kaminari, please. I have standards. Shut up. Katsuki growled slowly. Your hero mode is still with me. Itsuki's mouth snapped shut with an audible click, a completely innocent expression on his face as he brushed invisible dust off his pants, as if he hadn't just been messing with his best friend. From the corner of his eyes, he saw Shinso hunched over his desk, face red, hand over his mouth. His entire body trembled with suppressed laughs. Itsuki turned to him, smiling sweetly, and waved. Oh man, Kaminari said, looking dejected after Itsuki's answer. Kinda wish you two were dating though. It would have been fun to tease Bakubro. Yeah, we could tease Bakubro with Midobro, Ashiro said with a pout. Stop calling me that, Katsuki yelled. Aw, Bakubro, you don't have to be sad because Midobro rejected you. It's okay, you'll find someone. Katsuki looked ready to kill. Who rejected me? Me? Reject me? As if he could. The door slid open, interrupting any further interaction. As the Mentos walked in, he looked a little surprised seeing half the class huddled around the other half of the class. But after he saw students, back to your seat, he didn't say anything much before he started the class. Isuku thought that maybe the weekdays wouldn't be as bad as his weekends. It had started out well, even though there had been slight throbs in his forehead and a numbness to his limbs. He had been okay. There had been no nightmares the night before. He had simply been too tired for it, and with no nightmares, no fear clung onto his shoulders, slowing him down. Or so he thought. Fear and trauma are such complex things. Just because it is not palpable on the surface, people have a tendency to believe that it's not there. Just because the common signs don't show, they think it's gone. And Itsuku had thought the same as he had woken up earlier that day, with no signs of incessant tremble in his hand and lack of the insensible itch under his skin that kept warning of the danger that wasn't there. Itsuki thought that maybe it was over. At least he tried to convince himself of shut. Maybe if he hadn't, he would have noticed the signs. Maybe he would have noticed the tension slowly building up inside of him. Maybe he didn't jump into fight or flight mode when there was a loud sound, but he did end up on edge. Maybe the whispers and voices around him didn't make him look over his shoulder every 5 seconds, but it did leave him failing to concentrate. Maybe his heart didn't try to tear its way out of his chest when he reached out for his dad and he wasn't immediately there. But it did make him tap his foot endlessly against the floor and look around until he caught a glimpse to make sure the man was safe and sound, not drenched in red with broken bones and torn lips, ashes, and the heroics class started out normally. They all walked out of the room, chattering and talking amongst themselves. That was until they found out that Eraserhead was going to overlook their fighting session, and it had all of them sprinting down the hall to the locker rooms and rushing to get changed. Suku didn't realize what he was doing as he walked at the very back, right next to Shincho, unknowingly keeping an eye on everything. His passive skills flared, and heightened sense notified him of every path that came up and merged with theirs. He didn't realize the reason behind him freezing at the very sight of his hero costume for the first time after fighting in the USJ. When they had been so close to dying, Zuyu almost turning to ash, Dad almost getting crushed to death, 13 getting torn apart by their own quirk, and he waved off a few notifications that popped up, and a sudden calm and steadiness washed over him. He put on his costume, fingers running across the almost imperceivable stitch across the part that had been accidentally torn during the fight. The repair work was perfect, but Kai was active and his fingers could tell the difference between the piece of cloth. He dragged the fingers down the length of his escrima stick, finding the only 3 spots that the material had dented slightly from the force of Nomu's attack. All Might was too late. A second later, and there would be bodies of heroes and heroes in training decorating the floor. A loss Isuku won't recover from. Everyone was in danger. How could Isuku not protect? And maybe Kai was the reason behind the sudden bitterness on his tongue, because he was lying to himself when he told himself he was okay. But it wasn't one of the usual signs, so Isuku didn't notice. He walked out of his changing room far quicker than everyone else, almost like he was on autopilot. Isuku, a voice called, and for the first time in the day, Isuku jumped. It wasn't as bad as before when his heart tried to run away from his body and his skin itched with an urgency. It was just a slight jump from hearing his name being called when everything had been so quiet. Wait, quiet? Ichigo blinked and refocused. It slowly dawned upon him that somewhere between the path from the classroom to the locker room, he had slipped into a dissociative state. With increasing alarm, he realized he had never noticed when the voices around him had slowly drowned out, so he wouldn't know if someone had attacked or if someone was injured or if something bad had happened while he wasn't paying attention because he was too goddamn busy being locked up in his head. Kid, the voice from before called again. And Isuku realized his mind had once again slipped out of his body in the short span of time. This time, when he refocused, there were familiar gray eyes in front of him, looking at him with so much concern that it left him unnerved. Why does he look so worried? Did something happen? Did I miss out on anything? He glanced around one more time to realize he was in an empty, unknown room. To his front left was an open door, and once he looked through there, he realized they were in one of the extra rooms attached to the indoor gyms. What? Isugu croaked out, voice cracking with the lack of use for hours he didn't realize had passed by. He frowned and pressed his lips together in a thin line, clearing his throat before he tried speaking again. What happened? His dad stared at him with a look that said he was deep in thoughts before he asked, Kid, what was the last thing you remember? Why is he always so close to the mic? Walking into the gym? Why? Isik replied. His dad, once again, silently studied him for a few seconds before he answered. All Might notice you were being unresponsive after walking into the class, even when he directly addressed you, so he took you to the side to talk in person, but you still weren't talking. Isuku froze. Panic rose up his throat like thorns and vines as he realized someone had touched him, moved him, and he hadn't even realized. Kid. A rough hand clapped around his own, which had started to tremble without his notice. The warm cast had grounded him, giving him an anchor to hold on to his present and not get lost in the sea of elsewhere. Isuku started trying to find out what to say. His dad let out a sigh. It wasn't unkind, but worried before he said, Maybe you should rest this class out. No, Isuku said, a little more rest than he would have liked, but he couldn't rest, not when he had finally fallen into a rhythm of being okay, or at least he believed he had. Resting would make all of it a lie. Resting would mean that things were not okay, that he was not okay, and I don't think I can take that right now. Even if it was make believe, it was enough, right? Isuku knew that if he had been in his dad's class or elective, he would have been banned from practice whether he liked it or not. But it wasn't his dad, but it wasn't. And dad was far too respectful to make decisions and give permissions on his own when it wasn't his class. So of course All Might was consulted. Ichigo knew that he wouldn't be able to convince his dad to let him practice, but All Might, him he could. And even though he felt horrible, guilty about doing so, the words so bitter on his tongue it made him want to throw up. And once he was done, and All Might had managed to convince his dad to let him participate, he had to take a whole minute just so he didn't throw up the moment he opened his mouth. The heroic lesson for the day was curated to prepare them for the oncoming sports festival. For the first 15 minutes, they just had to run an obstacle course, only the obstacle course was rigged to fall apart, crumble, or even explode. Non-lethal, of course. It was just a collar bomb, to be honest, at All Might's will. Then they shifted to a one-on-one fight. And then the frail house of cards hiding away Asuka's emotions, the one he had been struggling to keep upright, crumbled in its true manner. It happened unprecedentedly, much like the shit show that was the USJ tour. Why Shota had allowed All Might to let three quick fights happen simultaneously was beyond him. It wasn't his class, and he didn't think it was right to make decisions by himself. And at first, everything had been fine. Isugu was fighting Katsuki, Sero was fighting Ida, and Duraka was fighting Shoji. The gym was a huge place, so they were all given more than enough space to fight. The students didn't know, but the amount of area assigned to them was exactly the same as the area of the stage they would get for the one-on-one fight in the third round of the sports festival. One moment things had been fine, and the next three groups ended up way too close to each other. Shota, despite making it seem like he was resting against the wall, shot forward the moment he noticed the path of trajectories converging in the same spot, a skill he had perfected over years of hand-to-hand combat and parkour. He knew that if the students weren't stopped, Sarah would get thrown in the Katsuki the moment the blonde was activating one of his stronger explosives, and Shoji would end up back far too much to leave the others any room to jump away. Shota knew he would not be fast enough to stop both Katsuki and Zero at the same time when holding off Shoji, especially when all three of them were at the peak of their defense. His capture weapon loosened from around his neck as he shot it out to wrap around Zero to pull him away from the veins of the explosion. Deciding to use his quirk to cut off Katsuki was a logical action, except one, Erasure was a useful quirk, sure, but what made it as strong as it was, the fact it could be used on multiple people. And two, Shota had never used his quirk on his kid. So for the first 2 seconds or so, everything calmed down. Shota managed to prevent the oncoming disaster. He blocked Shoji from crushing Isuku as he stumbled back and pulled Zero away from Katsuki. He blinked and his quirk stopped working. Then, in the next second, Isuku crumbled. At first, Shota hadn't paid much attention to it. He had thought Isuku's reaction was because of the fight being abruptly stopped midway and him getting stopped mid-step. He had been focused on unraveling his capture weapon from around Zero, while he chided Katsuki to calm down with his explosiveness. He turned to address the All Might. A blood-curdling scream filled the gym. A scream Shota had recently woefully gotten familiar with as it tore through the silence of Asuku's room at night. His body moved before he registered, and before he knew, he was kneeling in front of Asuku. The kid hadn't moved an inch from where he had crumpled, hunched over with his forehead pressed against the ground, one hand clutched in his hair in a painful grip. grip, while the other was beyond sight under his chest. His back rose and fell in unsteady hitched rhythm. The sound of loud, broken breaths and sobs reached his ear. His body shook and trembled like a leaf in the wind. Joseph could hear him mumble, "No, no, no, please don't wake up. No, stop," over and over again under his breath. Jota tapped on the floor to get his attention. But when his kid showed no response, he slowly reached out. His fingers had barely grazed his shoulder when Asuka jumped back with a terrified cry. His face was blotched red all over, wild eyes running over the room, full of terror and fear, like he couldn't recognize any of the familiar faces. His fingers dug into the soft flesh of his upper arms, clawing into the skin until his nails broke through the skin. It was like he was trying to rip his own skin off. Technically, Shota knew that binding someone when they were having a panic attack was a horrible idea. Shota would never do it in normal cases. Only this time, if he didn't use his capture weapon to bind Suku's hands, he feared his son would hurt himself badly. He could see the sparks of lightning forming around his fingertips, the barely present smell of ozone in the air. Itsuki was probably a few seconds away from brutally crushing his own hand. Shota's capture weapon wrapped around Asuku's wrist, pulling them away from his arm. The boy tumbled forward, almost crashing before Shota caught him. He wrapped his capture weapon further around the boy's hand, twisting it together to keep him from trying to break his wrist to free himself. "Get everyone out of here," Shota said to no one in specific, and hoped at least someone would break out of their stupor and move the rest. He had no idea what Asugu was seeing, but he knew whatever he saw, the faces around him were terrifying him. "Kid, Isugu, please look at me," Shota requested, even though he knew his words were most likely not reaching his son. He tried over and over again, trying to catch his attention, to reach out slowly and carefully before he snapped free of the capture weapon and hurt himself. "Oi!" He heard Katsuki snap in the background. "Didn't you hear what Sensei said? Get out!" "But Midoriya," Odaka tried to protest. Her voice trembled with worry. "Bakugo's right, young Naraka. Young Midoriya needs space right now. Do not fret. He's in capable hands." All Might tried to reassure. "Sensei, what's happening?" Shota heard someone else ask, but he didn't have the mental capability to recognize the voice and put a face to it. "Oi, get the fuck moving now!" Katsuki snapped once more. The other students, despite their heavy reluctance, slowly filed out of the room. But by then, Shota had managed to calm his son enough so that he wasn't actively trying to rip his skin off. Or maybe that's Asuku's own doing. It didn't matter. Trembling green eyes finally looked at him, ringed with red and glossy from tears. They were oh so terrified, disbelief coating his expression. His lips parted in a soundless cry. As his hand reached out, "Dad," he croaked out. He sounded so scared, so terrified, so small. It broke Shota's heart. "Yeah, it's me," Shota answered, placing his hand into Asuku's outstretched hand. They were so cold. Shota could feel the little indents where Asuku's nail had dug into the flesh of his palm. He gave a gentle squeeze as he felt the tremors in his hand. "Dad, Dad, Dad," Itsuku cried out, barreling forward until his head pressed against Shota's chest. Shota immediately wrapped his arm around him, tight enough to ground Isuku and remind him of his presence, but loose enough that if Isuku wanted to move away, he could. And then, like a dam breaking, Isuku broke, crying and sobbing, shaking like a leaf in his arms. His hand clenched and unclenched Shota's uniform, tugging and pulling at the cloth. Shota rubbed his back, murmuring comforting sweet nothings as he tried to calm him down further. It took a long time. Shota wasn't sure how long, but he didn't care. He knew Nezu was already made aware of the situation, and even if the class had long ended, the rat principal would ask someone else to substitute for him. In the end, Isugu quieted down to soft sniffles and hiccups, too tired to cry anymore. Shota had so many questions, but he knew better than to ask them right now. He was worried, yes, but he knew he could always ask questions later on. For now, he just let Isuku stay there, partially buried in his lap, never letting go. Eventually, the weight on his lap increased, and Shota realized Isuku had fallen asleep. Slowly and gently, he picked him up and carried him to the infirmary. There were no major wounds, but Isuku's nail had broken into the skin at a few points on his skin, drawing enough blood. Shota decided to treat them anyways. He had questions, but his son came first. Alright, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I'm sorry for any stumbling over my words or mispronunciations. Anyways, I'll see you next time. Bye bye.